Hi, this is the second part video of how to upgrade Virtuozzo 6 storage cluster to Virtuozzo 7. In the first part, we discussed planning requirements and other consideration before making the actual upgrade. Now I will show you the reinstallation steps. So here it is. On the left I have console login to the node 1 in my demo lab, and there is also SSH to the second node. Here I want to show you the cluster that I have. So if I type storage top, here you can see I have 5 nodes with 2 chunks server on each of the nodes and 1 client on each node. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to reinstall the first node, but before doing so I have to remove the chunk services of the first node. So let's go here and find the list of chunk services, metadata services that we have on this node. So pstorage -c list services. So we have 2 chunk service 1025 and 1026 and MDS number 1. I will start with removing metadata server. Continue with the next one. So let's confirm that we have no services left here. We're not. The cluster is still mounted and potentially I could have virtual machines here or containers. So I do not have any here, but before reinstalling the nodes, just make sure that you have no virtual machines here and that they are all migrated to another nodes. So all of these actions should be performed on empty nodes. So this node is empty. Let's reboot it and boot it with ISO image with Virtuozzo 7 installer. Okay, so I have rebooted this node to the latest version of Virtuozzo 7.0, and now we just need to perform the fresh installation. I will quickly guide you through. So we need to set up the same time zone that I have for other nodes, so the time source should be the same. We need to accept the license agreement. We should configure the network. The host name should be like this in my case. We also need to set up the Virtuozzo storage, and since this is the first node, I will select management panel and storage. But we will not actually create in the storage, we will be joining to existing storage, but we should have the management panel, so that's why we're selecting this. So this is the IP address that I selected for my UI container. We can also specify the host name. Let it be something simple. So this will be the host name, this is the IP address, and we're done here. We're also gonna be using Virtuozzo Automator, so we want to create Virtuozzo Automator container. This would be the IP address, and this will be the host name. Finally, we should set up the installation, the destination. Because we are using the UI, the only thing that we need to select is the system disk. So I have 3 disks, and the first one will be the system, and 2 others will be participating in the cluster, and I will be configuring them in a UI once it started. Okay, so we are good to go. I press begin installation, and I need to provide the license, root password. So the installation is completed. We can reboot it and see what we get here. We have two containers with the IP addresses that we want it to be and the names. Let's check what we have in UI. I have opened here the IP address of UI container. Now let's log in with the same password that we used for the node itself. Okay, you see here I have one unassigned node, which is this VZ7-1, and in case if you are willing to go with a second cluster approach, you can skip the next few steps and just go on and create new cluster. But if you want to make a mixed cluster, in this case we need to connect this UI to existing cluster. So here are the steps to do that. We need to enable backward compatibility to allow managing the cluster from the upgraded node and the new Virtuozzo storage management panel. We need to open the file. We need to add environment variable here. Okay, I have added PCS force client ID equals 1 to environment line of the file. So I need to save it and reload the systemctl tool. Also restart the service. Now we need to go here in the storage UI and assign network roles to interfaces. You see I have two interfaces here. BR1 should be used for storage interface, so I will use it as internal, but also I will not be using it for management. So I deselect this one because my UI is connecting via different IP address, so I deselect these and press done. Next, I should configure the BR0. This is a public role, but I also use it for management. I choose this configuration. Okay, this is done. Now we should authenticate the nodes in old cluster. We type vstorage, the name of our cluster. Just to remind you, here is our existing cluster. Its name is demo. We hit enter. It asks us for a password. This is the password that was provided during the cluster configuration on Virtuozzo 6. So the same password used here. Now we need to go into the management and press add node. We need to see this token here that we're gonna use while connecting the node through the special script. With this command, we will command this node to join the management panel with the cluster that we have configured on this node. So when we perform authenticate node, we have joined it to the cluster with the command line, and now we are joining to UI. The IP address is the IP address of UI container, and the token is that we are seeing in panel. We hit enter, type password of cluster once again, Okay, I have few errors here, but eventually I have joined the node, and you can see that I have the first node here in cluster. My problem here was that the network role was not correct. There should be 172, so once I'm corrected the network roles for the storage, everything works correctly. Now, once the node is configured, you can see that demo cluster appears automatically. In case if you would create a new cluster, you would have to create a cluster and set the name here, but we have a cluster set it up here. And what we need to do is we need to assign roles to the cluster. We open the node and we should assign disk roles. So I want this to be a metadata server, but I can't. Okay, I forgot that the disk should be bigger than 100 gigabytes to place both role system and metadata server, so we just create metadata on this disk. And we hit here and assign the chunk server. So it's storage. I will disable checksumming because this is not SSD, so checksum will decrease performance for a bit, so it's recommended for reliability on fast disks. If you have slow disk, as I do have here, we just use without a checksumming. If you have SSD, then you can create a cache disk and select caching. You can note that we have this 6 MDS, which is the reinstalled first one, and the new chunk server has been created, 1035. So with that, we actually rejoin the node into the cluster. Now it's working fine, and we can migrate virtual machine to this node and move forward and reinstall the another node. So the second node that we want to migrate would be VZ6-2. We need to make sure that there is no running virtual machines here and that they are all offloaded. There is no virtual machine here. One other thing that I forgot to mention before starting the migration is that obviously Virtuozzo 6 cluster has to be updated to the latest version. For example, if you have a Virtuozzo cluster version 6.10, which is a 2 update behind the latest one, there will be no way to make the cluster in mixed mode. So make sure that all of your clusters nodes on Virtuozzo 6 are up to date before starting the migration. That was the obvious one. So same thing, we need to remove the services from here. So we first list what we have here. We have 2 services here, so we make RMCS wait. Okay, so we removed all of the services from this node. There is no virtual machine here. Also, I don't have iSCSI targets, nothing like that, so it's safe to go on and reboot this node to installer. This would be the second node. You see that we have the first one here that we are managing. Note that whole cluster is visible for us, but we can manage only the first node where we have the services installed through UI. Now we do the same here. So we need to set up the proper time zone, the same as on another nodes. We need to accept user agreements, the network. I will skip the configuration. So I have configured the network for both interfaces, set this host name. We don't need management panel for Virtuozzo Automator, So we just will be registering in existing Virtuozzo automator. Remember we had one. I provided the IP address of management node, the passwords, same as the password was created for the first node when we reinstall the first node. And finally, here we need to select register in existing storage. We need to provide an IP address of management panel and token. We can get token here. Same here, my disk is too small for metadata service, so it will be on the second disk, but we will configure this later on. So this is how the second node and third and others nodes, except for the first one, should be configured. We join into existing management panel and Virtuozzo automator. Rather than this, everything should be the same. The installation is complete and we can go on with further configuration. Let's go to storage UI. We see we have an assigned node here. We need to configure network settings. Same way as on the first node. This will be storage role, but not management. And this one will be public with management. To assign disk role, we should join to the cluster this node. It's already selected the proper interface. I will press advanced configuration. Here it actually showed me what is the proposal for joining. This will be metadata, this will be storage tier, and I just need to disable checksumming in my setup. Once again, if you have SSD drives or if you have caching, you don't need to disable checksumming. Press join and proceed. Now if you look at the storage top, here I showed you to you, we see that there is a new chunk service and new MDS was attached. Those are from this new node, and we have two nodes right here. So this is how the migration will go on. Just reinstall node one by one and join them to the same cluster until we have no old nodes and everything can be configured through UI. One last thing that I forgot to mention is the data store. So right now we have no data store in services. Data stores are in compute section. If you want to manage data stores from here, not from command line, then you need to press add data store, type the name, for example VMs, select the tier and data redundancy, erasure coding or replication. We will be using replication with 3 replicas for virtual machines, and failed domain is host. This means that each unique replicas should be stored on host. This can be changed to disk, but this is not really reliable, so do not do this. Now we have data store. Let's see what's its offer. Here's our first node that we were reinstalling, and if we look at the storage mount, we see that there is the volume folder and data stores here and virtual machines. But this is not a default data store just yet, because if we type perl ctl, perl srvctl, we will see that our default storage for virtual machine is vzvm private and vz private for containers. By the way, this is where these two containers are located. They are not in storage, they are local. If you want to keep them in storage, you will need to migrate them once the storage is upgraded. Okay, so we need to change the default data store. For this, we will go to VAMN. In order to configure the data store, select the node, press Configure Virtual Environment Host Settings, and for virtual machine, select Data Store. We select the same for containers. The backups won't be changed, and we will apply this to all hardware nodes. Now let's see if something changed. You see data store now in the same as we configure in Virtuozzo Automator. That's it. That was a long video, and that's all what I wanted to say about how to migrate cluster from Virtuozzo 6 to Virtuozzo 7. Thank you for your attention.